The late afternoon sun poured through the wide French windows, filling the room with a golden glow. Soft pastel pinks and baby blues colored the walls, carefully chosen to bring warmth and comfort. The pregnant wife Folly stood in the middle of the room, her hand resting on her round belly, smiling faintly as she traced the outline of the crib. Every corner of the nursery spoke of her love. A shelf lined with stuffed animals, a mobile of glittering stars above the crib, tiny baby shoes neatly arranged on a dresser. She moved slowly, careful with every step, humming a lullaby under her breath as she placed a folded blanket into the crib. Her eyes shimmered with quiet joy. This room wasn't just paint and furniture, it was the promise of motherhood, the safe haven she had built for the life growing inside her. Unbeknownst to her, jealousy was already coiled outside the door. The Mistress Kinza stood with a sneer tugging at her lips. She had everything she thought she wanted, the millionaire's wealth, his attention, his nights out in glittering hotels. But what Alia had, the growing bond of motherhood, was something Kinza could never own. Rage simmered in her veins as she stepped into the nursery the moment Alia left to fetch more decorations. With calculated cruelty, Kinza yanked the starmobile from the ceiling, its delicate pieces scattering across the floor. She knocked over the stuffed animals, stomping on a soft teddy bear until its seams split. Her hand swept across the dresser, sending baby shoes and folded clothes tumbling onto the ground. Finally, she took the framed ultrasound picture from the shelf and hurled it against the wall, the glass shattering into shards. By the time she was done, the nursery no longer radiated love. It looked like a battlefield, dreams trampled, innocence violated. Kinza smirked, satisfied, and walked out silently, leaving destruction in her wake. Minutes later, Alia returned, holding a small box of glow-in-the-dark stars she had planned to stick above the crib. The sight before her stopped her breath. Her heart pounded as she stumbled inside, eyes widening in horror. The crib lay toppled on its side. Tiny shoes were crushed beneath broken glass. The walls seemed darker now, robbed of their warmth. Alia dropped the box from her hands, stars scattering across the ruined floor. She pressed both palms to her belly as though shielding her unborn child from the violence. Her lips trembled. No scream left her throat, only a silent, suffocating pain. Tears slid down her cheeks, falling onto the broken pieces of her dreams. She crouched slowly, ignoring the sting of glass against her knees, and picked up the torn teddy bear, hugging it to her chest as if it could hold her together. That was the moment her husband entered. Ramis, the millionaire she once believed to be her protector, stood at the doorway, his suit jacket draped perfectly, his tie loosened with casual arrogance. Behind him, Kinza leaned lazily against the wall, her eyes glinting with satisfaction. "What happened here?" Alia whispered, her voice shaking. Ramis's expression was cold, impatient. "Stop exaggerating. It's just a room. Don't make drama out of nothing." Alia's eyes searched his, desperate for even a flicker of concern. "This was our baby's nursery. Everything is ruined." Kinza's laugh rang out like poison. "Maybe you should focus less on decorating and more on not being such a bore." Ramis's lips curved into a cruel smirk. He placed a hand on Kinza's shoulder, dismissing his wife as though she were invisible. "She's right. You've always been too sentimental. It's pathetic." The words sliced deeper than the broken glass beneath her feet. Alia felt something inside her shatter. The nursery no longer just a room but the symbol of her crushed motherhood. She lowered her head, tears dripping soundlessly as her husband and his mistress turned away, leaving her kneeling among the ruins of her unborn child's first home. And in that silence, with her hand protectively over her belly, a seed of resilience began to grow in her heart. The days that followed the destruction of the nursery stretched endlessly, each one heavier than the last. Alia had once believed that her husband Ramis would be her protector, the one who stood between her and the cruelties of the world. Instead, he had become her tormentor in a tailored suit, a stranger she no longer recognized. At first, she told herself it was just stress, that the pressures of his million-dollar empire had hardened him, made him sharp and careless. But the truth was far crueler. He didn't even try to hide the affair anymore. Alia sat alone at the grand dining table one evening, pushing food around her plate. The chandelier above glittered, but the seat across from her remained empty. Ramis had promised he would be home for dinner, yet again he hadn't come. Hours later, she saw a photo pop up on her phone. Friends had tagged him at an upscale restaurant downtown. He wasn't alone. Kinza, the mistress, leaned across the table, toward him, her hand resting casually on his arm, as he laughed. eyes shining in a way they hadn't in years when looking at Aliya. The betrayal wasn't silent anymore. It was paraded. Flashbacks pierced her like shards of glass. She remembered the early days of their marriage, when Ramiz couldn't keep his eyes off her. Their honeymoon in Santorini, where he whispered promises under the stars. The late-night drives when he swore she was his whole world. The tender kiss on her forehead the day she told him she was pregnant. His eyes wet with joy. But those moments felt like a cruel joke now. Each memory, once precious, now mocked her reality. Kinza knew exactly how to tighten her grip on him. She played her role masterfully, sliding venom into his ear whenever Aliya wasn't present. "She's weak," Kinza would murmur, her tone dripping with disdain. "She cries too much. She makes you look soft. How can a man like you, a self-made millionaire, be dragged down by someone so boring?" Ramiz would smirk, sipping his expensive whiskey, letting her words settle like poison. "You're right. She doesn't understand me anymore." Kinza tilted her head, her lips brushing close to his ear. "Because she can't keep up with you. You deserve someone exciting, someone who looks good on your arm. Not that." That was his pregnant wife, the woman carrying his child, the woman who had once been his pride. Aliya felt the walls of her marriage closing in on her. Every time she reached for him for comfort, for conversation, for reassurance, he recoiled. If she asked about the baby's future, he snapped that he was too busy to discuss trivial things. If she cried, he rolled his eyes and told her she was being dramatic. One night, unable to hold back, she confronted him. "Ramiz, what happened to us? Why are you doing this?" He looked at her with an expression so cold it froze her blood. "Because I'm tired of you. You've become nothing, just a burden. Do you really think being pregnant makes you special? Women give birth every day. Stop acting like it matters." The words cut her deeper than any knife could. She felt her knees weaken, her hand instinctively going to her stomach. The child inside her kicked as if sensing her pain, and that single movement gave her something to hold on to. For a fleeting second, she saw her reflection in the hallway mirror, her face pale, her eyes swollen from nights of crying, her frame tired and heavy with pregnancy. But in that reflection, she also saw strength. Not the strength of a wife clinging to a husband who no longer wanted her, but the strength of a mother, determined to survive for her child. The betrayal burned her, hollowed her out, but it also sparked something unyielding. She realized she had no support from the man she trusted, no safe haven in the marriage she once thought unbreakable, and yet, within her belly, she carried hope, a heartbeat stronger than all the cruelty in the world. As she lay in bed that night, tears dampening her pillow while Ramiz slipped out to meet Kinza again, she whispered to her unborn child, "You are all I have. But you are enough. I will not let them break me." The days blurred together, each one heavier than the last. Aliya found herself trapped in a silence that grew thicker with every hour Ramiz spent away. The once lively home, with its echo of laughter and clinking glasses, had become a prison of echoing footsteps and closed doors. She wandered through the empty halls like a ghost, one hand pressed against her swollen belly, the other dragging along the walls for balance. At night, she sat on the edge of her bed with the lamp flickering softly, her arms curled around her stomach as if hugging her unborn child could keep her sane. Her whispers filled the darkness. "Don't worry, my love, Mama's here. Even if no one else is." But the loneliness was unbearable. Ramiz rarely came home before dawn, and when he did, he reeked of alcohol and Kinza's perfume. He offered no tenderness, no words, not even a glance in her direction. The silence between them was louder than any argument. Outside, the world seemed to conspire against her. Neighbors whispered when she passed. She could feel their eyes on her back, the sharp sting of their pity disguised as curiosity. "Poor woman, her husband is never home. Did you hear? He's always out with that other woman." Imagine being pregnant and abandoned like that. Each murmur chipped away at her pride. She avoided the market, avoided the gatherings she once attended. The humiliation of knowing the world saw her as the neglected wife was almost too much to bear. Then came the financial cruelty. One afternoon, Aliya stood at the cashier in a small grocery store, her basket filled with essentials: milk, bread, vitamins for her pregnancy. When she handed over her credit card, the cashier glanced at her awkwardly. "Declined, ma'am." She tried another card. Again, declined. Her face flushed with shame as the line behind her grew restless. She left the basket there, head bowed, tears threatening to spill as she walked out empty-handed. That night, she confronted Ramiz, her voice breaking. "Why did you cut off my cards? How am I supposed to take care of myself? Of your child?" Ramiz's expression was one of bored cruelty. "You don't need money. I give you a roof over your head. That should be enough. Don't act like you're entitled to anything more." He left before she could answer, slamming the door behind him. That was the night everything collapsed inside her. She sank to the nursery's floor of the same ruined nursery Kinza had destroyed and clutched the torn teddy bear against her chest. Tears streamed down her face as sobs racked her body. For the first time, she felt utterly powerless. Even breathing hurt, as if the walls of the house were closing in to suffocate her. Her reflection in the broken glass of the picture frame stared back at her, swollen eyes, cracked lips, a woman reduced to nothing. She whispered bitterly to herself, "They've taken everything. My dignity, my peace, even my nursery." And then, through the haze of despair, something sparked. The child in her womb shifted, a small but undeniable kick, a reminder, a call. Aliyah pressed her hand tightly against her belly, her sobs slowing as her eyes sharpened. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "They can't take everything, not from me." She looked around the nursery not as ruins, but as a challenge. The broken crib, the scattered toys, the shattered glass, they weren't the end. They were the beginning. "If they took away my nursery," she murmured, her voice steadier now, "I'll build an empire." In that moment, her despair didn't vanish, it transformed. It became fuel, a fire deep inside her heart. She knew she was at her lowest point, but she also knew this was where her rise would begin. Aliyah woke the next morning with swollen eyes and an ache in her chest, but also with a strange clarity. Hunger gnawed at her, and she couldn't ignore the fact that her pantry shelves were almost bare. With no access to credit cards, she dug through her jewelry box, pulling out a simple gold bangle, one of the few pieces Ramiz hadn't taken away or given to Kinza. She slipped it into her purse, determined to pawn it if necessary. That the small, local baby store at the corner of town had always caught her eye. Its windows displayed cribs dressed in pastel bedding, racks of tiny onesies, and shelves of eco-friendly toys. Unlike the glossy department stores where she used to shop with Ramiz, this place radiated warmth, like it was run by someone who genuinely cared about mothers and children. When she pushed open the door, a soft bell chimed above her. The scent of lavender drifted from a diffuser. A woman in her 50s, with silver hair pulled back into a bun and kind eyes framed by glasses, stepped out from behind the counter. "Welcome, dear," the woman greeted warmly. "How far along are you?" 7 months, Aliyah whispered, her voice tinged with hesitation. The woman's gaze softened, noticing the sadness clouding Aliyah's features. "First child?" "Yes." "Well, congratulations." She touched Aliyah's arm gently. A motherly gesture Aliyah hadn't felt in so long that it nearly brought her to tears. "You're doing wonderfully. Come, let's find what you need." For the next half hour, the store owner guided her through shelves, pointing out organic cotton blankets, toxin-free baby bottles, and cribs made from sustainable wood. Aliyah ran her fingers over the items, her heart stirring. Everything was simple, yet thoughtful, beautiful in its functionality. When Aliyah hesitated at the register, embarrassed at her lack of funds, the woman smiled gently. "Pay what you can, dear, and when you can't, come back anyway." Mothers should never feel ashamed for needing help. That kindness pierced through Aliyah's despair. As she walked out of the store with a small bag in hand, a single blanket and a bottle she could afford, her mind buzzed with possibility. That night, sleep eluded her. Instead, she pulled out an old notebook from her desk and began sketching. Her fingers moved quickly, as if guided by the pain and love tangled inside her. She sketched a crib with adjustable safety locks, a stroller that folded easily for mothers who traveled alone, a line of baby clothes designed with both comfort and eco-friendliness in mind. Tears blurred her vision, but they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of awakening. For the first time since her world had collapsed, she felt a spark of purpose. She imagined other mothers, abandoned or belittled like her, walking into a store and finding not just products but dignity. She imagined shelves filled with items that represented care, safety, and strength, everything she wanted to give her child. The broken nursery no longer haunted her as a loss. Instead, it became the seed of an idea. What if she created spaces and products for children that could never be destroyed by cruelty or neglect? As the hours passed, her notebook filled with designs and notes. She wrote words across the first page in bold strokes. A safe world for every child. Aaliyah leaned back, pressing her hand to her belly as her baby shifted inside her, almost as if affirming her vision. This is for you, she whispered. For us. They may have tried to destroy me, but they've given me a reason to rise. By dawn, exhaustion pulled her into sleep at her desk. But she slept differently this time, her face resting on dreams, not of despair, but of determination. The seed of an idea had been planted, and Aaliyah watered it with every heartbeat of her unborn child. But ideas alone could not sustain Hirsch. She needed knowledge, resources, and courage. And so, in the quiet hours, when Ramis was out flaunting his mistress, Aaliyah transformed her solitude into secret labor. Late at night, she sat hunched over, her laptop at the dining table, her swollen ankles propped on a chair, scrolling through endless articles about baby brands, suppliers, and trends. She read about the dangers of chemical-laden baby products, about mothers craving safe, sustainable alternatives. She bookmarked pages, took furious notes, and sketched improvements in her worn notebook. The challenges of pregnancy made the process harder. Her back ached, her feet swelled, and exhaustion pulled at her every evening. Yet, as she rubbed her belly and felt the kicks within, she whispered, "We're doing this together." The life inside her wasn't a burden, it was her driving force. Still, the reality of her situation pressed down on her. She had no financial support. Rameus had stripped her of cards and accounts. Everything she did, she would have to fund on her own. One evening, she sat before her jewelry box, staring at the glittering relics of a life once gilded by love. The diamond necklace Rameus had gifted her on their second anniversary. The emerald bangles she wore at their wedding reception. She slid each piece into a small pouch, her heart heavy but resolute. At the pawnshop, she exchanged the jewelry for a modest sum. It wasn't much, but it was hers. She also discovered a hidden envelope in her wardrobe, a few bills she had stashed away years ago for emergencies. She smiled wryly. If ever there was an emergency, this was it. With that money, she scoured the town until she found a small, dusty shop on a quiet street corner. The windows were grimy, the walls cracked, but when she stepped inside, she felt a strange warmth. She could almost picture it filled with cribs, shelves of toys, rows of baby clothes. To anyone else, it was a forgotten hole in the wall. To her, it was possibility. The landlord raised an eyebrow when she offered cash for the first 3 months' rent. "You sure you want this place? It needs work." Aaliyah nodded firmly. "I'm sure, I'll make it work." And so began her transformation of the space. With limited funds, she couldn't afford contractors or decorators. She rolled up her sleeves and painted the walls herself in soft pastels, even though her belly strained against her balance. She scrubbed the floors until they gleamed, hung shelves she bought secondhand, and arranged baskets for toys and blankets. Every stroke of paint, every nail she hammered, felt like reclaiming a part of herself. When the first crib arrived, a simple wooden frame she had bargained for at a warehouse sale, she placed it gently in the center of the shop. Her hands trembled as she smoothed the bedding. For a moment, her eyes misted over. It wasn't just furniture. It was a symbol of everything she had lost and everything she was building anew. The final touch was the window display. She arranged a mobile of stars, a teddy bear, and a folded blanket, recreating the nursery she had once loved. As she stepped back to look, her heart clenched with bittersweet pride. What had once been destroyed in cruelty was now reborn as a place of hope, not just for her but for every mother who would walk through that door. She stood in the center of her tiny boutique, breathing in the faint scent of fresh paint and new beginnings. Her baby kicked, as if in approval, and she smiled. "This isn't just a shop," she whispered. "This is our nursery now, and soon, it will be more than that. It will be our empire." The morning of her grand opening dawned with nervous excitement. Aaliyah stood outside her little boutique, the pastel-painted sign above the door freshly hung. "Little steps, baby." Boutique. Her hands trembled as she tied a ribbon across the entrance. Her belly was heavy now, 8 months into her pregnancy, and every step felt slower. But her spirit pushed her forward. She had set up the shop with such care. Rows of soft cotton onesies, folded neatly, eco-friendly bottles, lined on shelves. A corner dedicated to handmade toys that gleamed with safe, natural polish. The window display, her pride, showed a crib with a star mobile gently swaying above it. A teddy bear propped against the pillow. She had imagined mothers flocking in, curious eyes widening, smiles breaking as they saw her creations. But as the hours passed, the reality was different. The first 2 hours went by with only a trickle of footsteps. People peeked through the window but kept walking. Alia sat behind the counter, her palms sweating, eyes darting to the door each time the bell above chimed only, to find it was just the wind rattling it. Doubts began gnawing at her heart. What if I made a mistake? What if no one cares about what I built? By mid-afternoon, she fought tears. Her ankles throbbed, her back ached, and despair whispered cruelly, "You're foolish. You sold your jewelry for this." And then, just as she was about to close early, the bell rang. A woman with a toddler on her hip and fatigue written across her face stepped in. She looked around curiously, her eyes landing on the organic cotton blankets. "These are soft," the woman murmured, running her fingers over the fabric. "Where did you get these?" "I designed them," Alia admitted nervously. "They're safe, toxin-free, gentle for sensitive skin." The woman's tired expression softened into a smile. "I'll take 2. Alia almost cried with relief as she rang up her first sale. Later, another mother came in, drawn by the wooden toys in the window. She left with a small basket of items, promising to tell her friends. The day ended with only a handful of customers, but to Alia, each one was a victory. She carefully folded the receipts into a notebook, whispering, "We did it, baby. We made a start." Over the following weeks, the word began to spread. One mother told another, and soon small groups began trickling in. They praised the thoughtful designs, the safety of the products, and the warmth of the shop itself. Some returned again and again, bringing friends along. Alia greeted each with genuine care, offering advice, listening to their stories, often sneaking in small discounts for mothers who struggled. Balancing the shop with her pregnancy was no easy task. Some mornings, her feet swelled so badly she could barely stand behind the counter. On days of doctor appointments, she closed the shop early, apologizing to customers. Yet she never complained. She reminded herself, "This is for us, for our future." Slowly, the boutique became more than a store. It became her second home, her sanctuary. Each shelf she stocked felt like decorating a nursery not just for her child, but for many. When she stood in the middle of her shop at closing time, the lights dimmed and the shelves tidy, she felt a peace she hadn't known in months. One evening, she whispered as she locked the door, her hand caressing her belly, "This isn't just a business. This is our new nursery, and no one can destroy this one." Her boutique was still small, but its roots were strong. The nursery they tried to crush had given birth to something far greater hope that was growing, just like the child inside her. News of Alia's tiny boutique began to ripple through the community, though it wasn't yet the talk of the city. A few loyal mothers praised her products in local groups, and slowly, word of mouth spread. But the whispers also reached Kinza's sharp ears. One afternoon, she and Ramiz sat at a high-end cafe in the city center, sipping iced lattes, while photographers snapped casual shots of the power couple. Kinza leaned across the table, holding up her phone with a mocking smirk. On the screen was a social media post of a mother praising Little Steps Baby Boutique for finally offering safe, eco-friendly products for children. "Look at this," Kinza laughed, her voice carrying loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. "Your little wife has opened a baby shop. How pathetic. Selling blankets and wooden toys like some street vendor." Rameez glanced at the phone, snorted, and leaned back in his chair. Figures. She always wasted time on sentimental nonsense. Let her play shopkeeper. It makes her feel important. The surrounding guests chuckled politely, feeding on the humiliation. Kinza leaned in closer, her voice sweet but her eyes venomous. "Imagine what people will say your wife, once living in a mansion, now standing behind a counter like a clerk. How embarrassing for you." Ramiz smirked, raising his glass. "Embarrassing. It's laughable." Together, they toasted to her supposed failure, unaware of the irony. Yet, beneath the surface, cracks were forming in their glittering facade. Ramiz's investments had begun to dip. The economy had shifted, and several of his risky ventures were underperforming. His once booming empire no longer flowed with the same ease. Creditors had started calling, demanding repayments. The luxury lifestyle he flaunted with Kinza was being upheld by loans and appearances. But appearances were all that mattered to him for now. Meanwhile, Alia's store quietly grew. She wasn't making millions, but she was making impact. Mothers trusted her. They spoke highly of the quality and safety of her products, of the personal care she poured into every detail. Her shop became a meeting place for women who felt seen and valued. One morning, a young mother entered with her infant in her arms, tears shining in her eyes. "Your store saved me," she told Aaliyah. "I couldn't afford those expensive brands, and they made me feel like I was failing as a mother. But your products, they're affordable, safe, and beautiful. Thank you." Those words filled Aaliyah more than any profit margin could. She returned home each night exhausted, but her exhaustion was laced with pride. Every receipt, every smile, every customer was proof that she was no longer powerless. The contrast couldn't have been sharper. Kinza flaunted designer gowns at parties while whispering venom about Alia's pathetic shop, but behind the gloss of her diamonds lay unpaid bills. Ramiz drove expensive cars, but 2 of them were leased. The empire they boasted of was beginning to rot. The tables were turning, though neither of them realized it yet. Alia's small boutique, born from heartbreak, was steady and growing. Their empire, born of greed and betrayal, was crumbling. Late one evening, as Alia locked up her boutique, she looked through the glass window at the crib in her display. The Star Mobile turned slowly in the breeze from the vent, casting soft shadows on the walls. She smiled faintly, her hand on her belly. "They laughed at us," she whispered to her unborn child, "but every day, we're proving them wrong." And, for the first time, she no longer felt like the abandoned wife. She felt like the beginning of something greater. The tiny boutique that began as a flicker of hope soon grew into a steady flame. Within a year, Little Steps Baby Boutique was no longer just a corner store. It was becoming a name people in the city whispered with admiration. The soft pastels of her displays, the eco-friendly cribs, the hand-stitched blankets all carried a personal touch that bigger brands lacked. One afternoon, a local lifestyle magazine featured her in an article titled "The Heart Behind the Cradle, Alia's Baby Revolution." The photos captured her standing proudly behind her counter, her round belly visible, her smile radiant. The article praised her vision for creating safe, sustainable baby products that were not only stylish, but affordable. It spread like wildfire on social media, and suddenly, more mothers began flocking to her store. But Alia's genius didn't stop there. While researching, she noticed how overwhelming it was for new mothers to piece together nursery items from different places. So she introduced a new service, custom-designed nurseries. Parents could consult her, and she would personally design and arrange safe, beautiful, and affordable rooms tailored to their budgets. The idea struck a chord. Soon, she was being invited to homes of expectant mothers, sketching layouts and selecting furniture. Watching a new mother's eyes fill with joy when she saw her finished nursery reminded Aaliyah of the day she once decorated her own, only to have it destroyed. Each nursery she designed became her silent redemption, one room at a time. She was rebuilding the dream that had been taken from her. But what made her stand apart was not just business, it was compassion. Alia quietly began a policy that wasn't advertised. If a struggling mother came in, one who couldn't afford even the basics, Alia would make sure she left with something. A crib at half price. A blanket gifted quietly. Sometimes she slipped free bottles and diapers into shopping bags when she saw weary eyes trying to hide embarrassment. Word spread not through advertisements, but through grateful whispers. "She understands us," mothers said. "She doesn't just sell, she cares." Her boutique became more than a store. It became a safe haven. Women gathered there to talk, share stories, and support one another. It wasn't just about products anymore, it was about community. Within 2 years, Aaliyah opened her second outlet in a busier part of town, then a third, in a suburban neighborhood where young families were growing. Each one carried her signature, pastel palette, her eco-friendly ethos, and her nurturing spirit. Customers walked in not just for items but for the sense of belonging. Soon, media outlets began to notice. She was invited to speak at small business conferences, then larger ones. Her story, a pregnant woman, abandoned by her husband, who rose from nothing to build a thriving brand, captivated audiences. Cameras loved her humility, her elegance, her quiet strength. And slowly, her name began to appear in unexpected places. Newspaper headlines, radio interviews, even a feature on a primetime talk show where she sat gracefully, her daughter, now a toddler, sitting on her lap, answering questions about resilience and entrepreneurship. Meanwhile, in the gleaming high offices where Ramiz once reigned supreme, her name began to echo like a haunting reminder. At first, he dismissed it when colleagues mentioned a brilliant new baby brand, but soon, investors at meetings spoke of her, Some of his clients praised her stores, saying their wives adored the products. Each time he heard little steps or Alia, his jaw tightened. He had once laughed at her for standing behind a counter. Now her counters were multiplying across the city, becoming more profitable by the month. Kinza, once smug, now frowned every time she saw Alia's picture on a magazine stand. The irony was sharp. While Ramiz's empire strained under debts and overextension, Alia's empire was growing quietly, steadily, and with deep roots. Hers was not built on greed but on purpose. One evening, as Alia tucked her daughter into bed, she stood by the window of her modest but warm home, looking at the city lights. She whispered softly, "They thought they destroyed my nursery, but look now, we've built nurseries for hundreds." And as her daughter's gentle breathing filled the room, Alia smiled. She no longer needed their validation. The world itself was giving it to her. The grand opening of Alia's flagship store was the culmination of years of struggle, sacrifice, and rebirth. Situated on one of the city's busiest boulevards, the boutique was no longer a humble shop. It was now a gleaming, two-story showroom with glass walls, soft golden lighting, and elegant displays of eco-friendly nurseries. Invitations had gone out to local press, influencers, and business leaders. The excitement in the air was palpable, but not everyone celebrated her success. Kinza had been watching from the shadows, jealousy boiling within her. Once, she had relished mocking Alia for running a pathetic little shop. Now, Alia was the talk of the town, featured on magazine covers Kinza could only dream of. Her envy had turned venomous. She devised a cruel plan to sabotage the grand opening, to humiliate Alia in front of the very people who admired her. That evening, as cars lined up outside the store and photographers flashed their cameras, Alia arrived in a graceful gown of soft ivory, her daughter perched proudly on her hip. Applause rippled through the crowd as she cut the ribbon, her smile serene but radiant. The world saw not a broken wife, but a visionary woman, a mother who had turned ashes into an empire. Suddenly, chaos erupted. Kinza pushed her way through the crowd, her voice shrill, dripping with bitterness. "Don't be fooled," she cried, waving a handful of papers. "She's no saint. She's a liar, a fraud, pretending to be some kind of hero while stealing designs from others." The murmurs began instantly. Cameras swung toward the commotion. For a moment, the air thickened with uncertainty, but Alia did not flinch. She stepped forward, her eyes steady, her posture unshaken. "Kinza," she said, her voice calm yet commanding, "you've tried to break me before. You tried to destroy my home, my marriage, and my life. And now, you think you can destroy what I've built with my own hands." Kinza faltered, taken aback by Alia's unwavering composure. Alia turned to the crowd, lifting her chin. "Every design in this store was drawn by me. Every product has been certified, tested, and loved by the mothers who shop here. The only theft here is your attempt to steal dignity with lies." The audience, already familiar with Alia's reputation for honesty and compassion, erupted in applause. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras clicked, and whispers turned into open admiration. Kinza's attempt had backfired. Spectacularly, she stood exposed, not as a whistleblower, but as a bitter, destructive woman consumed by envy. And then, in the back of the crowd, Ramiz appeared. He had come not to congratulate, but to see for himself what the city was buzzing about. And when his eyes landed on Alia dressed in elegance, her daughter's small arms wrapped around her neck, his world tilted. This was not the timid wife he had abandoned. This was a leader, a mother, a respected entrepreneur. Regret stabbed him like a knife. He remembered the night he laughed at her dreams, the day he cut off her credit cards, the moment he chose Kinza's shallow flattery over his wife's loyalty. And now, standing there, he saw the truth. She had risen without him. She had become everything he could never be. His eyes glistened, and for the first time in years, he cried. Not loud sobs, but silent tears that streaked down his face as he watched his daughter reach for Alia's hair and giggle softly. That child, his child, looked at her mother with pure love, while he stood as an outsider, unworthy of that world. The event ended not in scandal but in triumph. Guests congratulated Alia, reporters hailed her strengths, and mothers lined up to tour the flagship store. Kinza slipped away in disgrace, her sabotage exposed. Ramiz, once powerful, now hollow, watched from the sidelines, broken by the sight of the family he had lost forever. Months passed, and with them came a season of rebirth. Alia's belly had grown heavy with life, but so too had her empire flourished. By the time the first snow dusted the city streets, she was no longer just a shop owner. She was the founder of a nationally recognized chain of baby stores, a brand synonymous with innovation, safety, and compassion. The day she gave birth was both ordinary and extraordinary. In a sunlit hospital room, surrounded by the gentle hum of machines, she cradled a healthy baby boy in her arms, his small fingers curled tightly around hers, his first cries echoing like a victory song. Beside her, her daughter giggled in awe, peering at her newborn brother with wide, protective eyes. For Alia, it wasn't just the birth of a child, it was the birth of a legacy. Her life, once defined by humiliation and despair, was now brimming with warmth and purpose. She wasn't just a survivor, she was a creator, a mother twice over, and a leader of women who found hope in her story. Newspapers ran headlines like From Broken Nursery to Baby Store Empire, and the woman who redefined motherhood in business. Her name was everywhere, not because of scandal, but because of triumph. Weeks later, on the day of her flagship store's first anniversary, Alia made a quiet yet powerful appearance. She entered through the grand glass doors, her newborn son nestled against her chest, her daughter holding her free hand. The store glowed with warm lights and shelves lined with carefully crafted products, cribs, blankets, eco-friendly toys, all born from her vision, her pain, and her resilience. As she walked through the aisles, customers turned to look. Some whispered in admiration, others applauded softly. A few mothers even wiped away tears, recognizing her as more than a businesswoman, but as one of them, a mother who understood their fears, their dreams, their need for safe and beautiful nurseries. A film crew quietly followed her, documenting the moment for a special feature. Her voiceover, and resolute, filled the air as the camera panned across rows of glowing nursery displays. They destroyed my nursery, so I built a kingdom of them. It was more than a line, it was the truth of her journey. Meanwhile, across town, a very different scene unfolded. Ramiz sat slumped on a worn-out couch in a small, dimly lit apartment. The man who once carried the arrogance of wealth now looked weathered, broken. His business had collapsed under debt, his reputation shredded by scandal, and Kinza had long since abandoned him for another wealthy benefactor. On the flickering television in front of him, Alia's interview played. He watched her radiant smile, the pride in her eyes as she held their children close, and the admiration that poured from the public. Tears streaked down his face, but there was no redemption waiting for him, only regret. He had lost not only his wife but the life she had created, the family she nurtured, and the empire she now ruled. The camera closed on Alia one last time, standing tall inside her flagship store, both children in her arms, bathed in golden light. She didn't look back, she didn't need to. Her future was forward, bright, and unstoppable.